Have you ever experienced that moment when you are in a room full of people, laughter echoing around you, conversations interweaving like threads of a seemingly perfect social tapestry, but you feel as though you are observing everything through thick glass, completely disconnected, as if speaking a language that no one else can understand? It is a sensation that cuts deep, like a cold blade piercing through the chest, because it is not just about being physically alone. It is about carrying within yourself a type of consciousness that seems incompatible with the world around you. You look at people who connect with such ease, who find comfort in superficial conversations, who seem to navigate social relationships like fish swimming naturally in familiar waters, and you wonder what is wrong with you. Why do things that seem so simple for others become insurmountable mountains in your experience? Why do you feel that you carry an invisible weight that no one else can see or understand? The truth is that there is nothing wrong with you. There is something profoundly different, yes, but this difference is not a flaw. It is a characteristic of a soul that was forged from a rarer material, more sensitive, more aware of the hidden layers of human existence. If you have made it this far, it is because you recognize this intimate pain that few understand, and I want you to know that this channel was created exactly for people like you, souls who feel the world in a more intense and profound way. Here, you will not be alone in this journey of self-discovery and acceptance. Each video is designed to offer not only understanding, but also practical tools to transform this sensitivity into your greatest strength. Subscribe now and become part of a community that understands that being different is not being less, it is being rare. And if this content is touching your heart in some way, leave your like, because this helps me reach other people who, like you, are seeking answers to questions they do not always know how to formulate. Franz Kafka, that architect of words who managed to translate into literature the most inexpressible sensations of the human condition, carried within himself this same strangeness, this same sense of displacement that you know so well. He was not just a writer, he was a mirror where lonely souls could finally recognize themselves without judgment. In his texts, we find characters who awaken, transformed into giant insects, who get lost in labyrinthine castles without ever finding who they seek, who are judged for crimes they do not even understand. These narratives are not just fiction, they are precise metaphors of the experience of those who possess a rarer soul, more sensitive to the contradictions and absurdities of the modern world. When Kafka wrote about the impossibility of genuine communication between human beings, he was not just creating literature, he was documenting an existential truth that people like you live every day. The solitude of rare souls is not the same solitude that an ordinary person experiences when temporarily finding themselves without company. It is an ontological solitude, a fundamental separation between how you perceive and process reality and how most people do it. It is as if you were born with more sensitive antennas, capable of capturing frequencies that others do not even know exist. You perceive the nuances in facial expressions that reveal unspoken pains, feel the weight of unspoken words, capture the melancholy that hides behind automatic smiles. This capacity for expanded perception, which should be celebrated as a gift, is often lived as a curse because it makes it impossible to accept the superficial interactions that satisfy most people. Imagine a musician with perfect pitch being forced to listen to an out-of-tune orchestra day after day. The dissonance is not just irritating, it is physically painful. Such is the experience of a rare soul trying to fit into a world that values conformity above authenticity, speed above depth, consensus above individual truth. You cannot simply turn off this sensitivity. You cannot stop perceiving the layers of meaning that exist behind the simplest everyday interactions. And the more you try to adapt, the more intensely you feel that you are betraying something essential within yourself. Modern society, with its obsession with networking, instant connections and quantifiable relationships through digital metrics, has created a particularly hostile environment for souls who need depth to feel truly connected. You have probably already experienced that strange sensation of being at a social event, surrounded by dozens of people, exchanging superficial information, talking about the weather, about work, about subjects that seem to float on the surface of human experience without ever touching what really matters. And while everyone around you seems perfectly satisfied with this level of interaction, you feel as if you are dying of thirst in an ocean of salt water. And have you ever felt this pain of being misunderstood even when surrounded by people? This feeling that your soul speaks a different language, deeper, that few can understand. If you are going through this now, leave in the comments. I have a rare soul, and I am learning to embrace it. Your courage in sharing this could be exactly what another person needs to hear today, because when we recognize our rarity, we create permission for others to do the same. What Kafka understood, and translated with mastery in his works, is that this experience of alienation is not a defect to be corrected, but a characteristic of a higher form of consciousness. His characters are not victims of their own sensitivity. They are explorers of existential territories that most people do not even know exist. When Gregor Samsa awakens, transformed into an insect, the narrative is not about the tragedy of transformation, but about how this transformation reveals the true nature of human relationships around him. The family that once depended on him now sees him as a burden. Work colleagues simply forget him, and he realizes that he was never really seen as a complete human being, but only as a function, a provider, a cog in the social machinery. This is the daily experience of a rare soul. You realize that many of the connections people call relationships are, in fact, unconscious contracts based on mutual utility, social convenience, or unexamined needs. You long for something deeper, more real, more authentic, but you find a world that seems to have conspired to keep everything on the surface. And when you try to go deeper, when you ask questions that matter, when you seek conversations that touch the essential, it is common to be labeled as too intense, too complicated, too difficult. But here is the truth that Kafka intuited, and that you need to understand viscerally. Your inability to be satisfied with superficial relationships is not a limitation. It is a characteristic of a soul that was forged for deeper and more meaningful connections. You cannot pretend interest in empty conversations the same way that a poet cannot be satisfied with advertising jingles. It is not a question of superiority or inferiority. It is a question of essential constitution. Your soul was molded from a different material, more sensitive, more receptive to the nuances of human experience. Contemporary culture, with its valorization of extroversion, constant sociability, and the ability to form quick and numerous connections, has created a narrative where the tendency toward isolation is automatically interpreted as social failure or emotional deficiency. But there is a fundamental difference between isolation that arises from the inability to connect and isolation that arises from the need to preserve the integrity of a rare sensitivity. The first is a limitation, the second is a form of existential self-care. Think of the great minds of history, the artists, philosophers, scientists and mystics who changed the course of humanity. The overwhelming majority were individuals who spent significant portions of their lives in solitude, not because they were incapable of relating, but because they needed this space to process and give form to perceptions that only they could capture. Van Gogh painted alone in sunflower fields, Einstein developed his theories on long solitary walks, Nietzsche philosophized in the Swiss mountains. They were not fleeing from humanity. They were diving so deeply into human experience that they needed solitude to not drown. Your natural tendency toward isolation may not be an escape from people, but a search for a space where you can exist without having to constantly translate your thoughts and feelings into a language that others can accept. It is a territory where you can feel life in its total intensity without having to turn down the volume so as not to disturb the less sensitive ears around you. In this space, you do not need to explain why certain songs make you cry, why certain books change something fundamental within you, why some conversations leave you emotionally exhausted even when there was no apparent conflict. The rare soul carries within itself a kind of cosmic antenna that captures not only what is said, but what is silenced, not only what is shown, but what is hidden, not only what is present, but also the significant absences. This capacity for expanded perception is simultaneously a gift and a challenge. It is a gift because it allows access to layers of meaning and beauty that go unnoticed by most people. It is a challenge because it makes it impossible to live on the surface, ignoring the undercurrents that move human life. When you find yourself at a party and feel that peculiar fatigue that does not come from physical tiredness, but from having to simultaneously process dozens of personalities, energies, undeclared intentions, and complex group dynamics, you are not being antisocial. You are experiencing sensory overload at a level that few understand. It's like being a person with ultra-sensitive hearing in an environment where everyone speaks at the same time at different volumes. The solution is not to force yourself to tolerate the discomfort, but to recognize that you function better in different configurations, with fewer simultaneous stimuli and more space for depth. The Kafkaesque world you inhabit is not a prison. It is an existential laboratory where you daily experiment with questions that most people only encounter in moments of profound crisis. You live constantly aware of the fragility of social structures, the arbitrariness of many conventions, the fundamental loneliness that exists at the heart of human experience. This awareness is not a curse. It is a form of early and continuous wisdom. But perhaps the most challenging aspect of possessing a rare soul is the constant internal pressure to normalize yourself, to find ways to fit into molds that were not created for your specific configuration. You may spend years trying to learn the language of small talk, forcing yourself to participate in social activities that drain your energy, trying to find interest in subjects that do not resonate with your deep nature. It is like trying to force a plant that grows in shade to flourish under direct sunlight. It may even survive for a while, but it will never reach its real potential. True transformation happens when you stop trying to adapt to environments that were not made for you, and begin to create spaces where your sensitivity can be expressed in its most authentic form. This does not mean isolating yourself completely from the world, but it means making conscious choices about how, when, and with whom you share your energy. It means recognizing that some people in your life can be journey companions for deep conversations, and others can be partners for lighter moments, and that both types of connection have value as long as you do not force either of them to be something they are not naturally. The path of the rare soul is not about finding your tribe in the conventional sense, because truly rare souls do not come in large groups. It is about learning to value authentic connections when they appear, even if they are sporadic, and about developing a rich and sustainable relationship with your own company. It is about transforming solitude from something you tolerate into something you actively choose as a sacred space for your growth and creativity. Kafka understood that the deepest human experience often happens in moments of greatest isolation, when we remove all social masks and find ourselves face to face with our own essential nature. It is in these moments that the great questions emerge, that creativity flourishes, that genuine insights arise. The rare soul does not need constant external validation, because it develops an internal source of meaning that is more stable and lasting than social approval. Your sensitivity is not a wound to be healed. It is an instrument of perception that needs to be tuned and honored. The world needs people like you who feel deeply, who question structures accepted without questioning, who refuse to accept superficial answers to deep questions. Your tendency toward isolation may be exactly what allows you to process and integrate experiences in a way that eventually benefits not only you, but all those who are lucky enough to genuinely connect with you. The journey of a rare soul is about learning to inhabit your own sensitivity as a sacred space, recognizing that your contemplative nature and your need for depth are not bugs in the system, but features of a more sophisticated version of human consciousness. You do not need to become more social to be valuable. You need to become more authentically yourself, to offer the world the unique gift of your singular perspective. When you finally embrace that your soul was forged from rarer material, you stop apologizing for needing more silence, more space, more time to process. You stop interpreting your need for solitude as a social failure and begin to see it as a characteristic of your unique constitution. And in this embrace, in this deep acceptance of your own nature, you find not only peace, but also the kind of freedom that only comes when we stop fighting against who we are and begin working in harmony with our most authentic essence.